Fritz Honka, Hamburg, late 1970s. The streets of St. Pauli are alive. Neon lights, smoky bars, cheap hotels, and the smell of beer hanging in the air. It's the beating, boozy heart of the port city, where sailors and prostitutes come looking for a bit of oblivion. But behind the walls of a run-down building at 74 Zeissstrasse, something truly horrifying was happening. A story that would forever stain Germany's criminal history. This is the story of Fritz Honka, a murderer whom neighbors knew only as a quiet, awkward man with a crooked face. Chapter 1. A Childhood in the Shadow of War. Fritz Honka was born on July 31, 1935, in Leipzig, into a poor working-class family. He was one of several children growing up in a home filled with alcohol and violence. His father, a communist activist, was sent to a concentration camp for opposing the Nazis and never came back. After the war, the family fell apart, and Fritz's mother couldn't take care of the kids. Little Fritz spent most of his childhood in orphanages, where he was beaten, humiliated, and often went hungry. A car accident left his face disfigured. His nose was crooked, and one eye turned inward. Other kids mocked him, girls turned away, and Fritz grew up shy, withdrawn, and deeply insecure. Chapter 2. Escape to the West. In the 1950s, Honka fled East Germany, hoping for a fresh start in the West. He ended up in Hamburg, the port city that drew in people from all over Europe. He worked construction jobs, slept in cheap hotels, and drank to forget how lonely he was. His face made him a target for ridicule, and women generally avoided him. But on St. Pauli, companionship was easy to find, especially in the grimy bars where society's outcasts gathered, prostitutes, drunks, and the homeless. Honka was drawn to these women, older, broken, often homeless. He saw in them reflections of himself, but beneath that pity simmered rage. Chapter 3. Zeissstrasse 74. In 1967, Honka moved into a small attic flat at 74 Zeissstrasse, cramped, airless, and cluttered. That became his world. At work, he was seen as quiet but reliable. After hours, he'd disappear into the bars of St. Pauli, especially one called Zum Goldenen Handschuh, the Golden Glove. That's where he met his victims. Women no one paid attention to. Women no one would miss. Most were older prostitutes, heavy drinkers, willing to go with him for a few marks and a bottle of schnapps. Chapter 4. The Murders Begin. His first murder came in 1970. His victim was a prostitute named Frida Roblick. After an argument, Honka strangled her in a drunken rage. Panicking, afraid someone might hear, he decided to hide the body. He dismembered her and stashed the pieces behind a false wall in his attic. Over the next few years, he killed 3 more women in almost the same way. Booze, an argument about sex or money, then strangulation. He cut up their bodies and hid them around his apartment. Eventually, the stench became unbearable. Neighbors complained about the awful smell from upstairs. Honka blamed it on cat piss or spoiled food. In truth, the remains of 4 women were rotting in his apartment, wrapped in plastic and newspapers. Chapter 5. The Double Life. Shockingly, no one suspected a thing for years. Fritz was odd, sure, but harmless. He sometimes gave neighbors small gifts or helped with repairs. But inside his flat, horror reigned. Naked pin-ups covered the walls, empty bottles littered the table. Honka often spoke aloud to the corpses, as if they were still alive. He later said, "They provoked me. They didn't do what they promised. They started screaming." In his mind, the killings were some kind of revenge for the humiliation he'd suffered his whole life. Chapter 6. Fire and Discovery. Everything unraveled by accident in 1975. On the night of July 16th to 17th, a fire broke out in the building at 74 Zeissstrasse. Firefighters searching the attic made a horrifying discovery. Bags full of human remains, heads, limbs, and other body parts. At first, they thought they were victims of the fire, but it quickly became clear that the murders had happened years before. Honka tried to run, but was caught nearby. Drunk and confused, he reportedly told the police, "They're just women from the Golden Glove." Chapter 7. The Trial. Honka's trial in 1975 gripped the German public. Newspapers called him The monster of St. Pauli. Psychiatrists concluded that he suffered from severe personality disorders and was only partially sane at the time of the murders. His lawyers argued that Honka was a victim himself of poverty, loneliness, and trauma. The court sentenced him to 15 years in prison and psychiatric treatment. Honka admitted to killing 4 women. He showed no remorse, just exhaustion, as if he barely grasped what he'd done. After 18 years in a psychiatric facility, he was released in 1993 and lived in a care home in Langenhorn. He died in 1998, aged 63, ironically, in a fire caused by a cigarette. His life ended the same way his crimes were discovered, in flames. Chapter 8. The Legacy of Horror. The story of Fritz Honka shook Germany to its core. His crimes exposed the dark underside of post-war society, the forgotten, the lonely, the discarded. His victims had no families to look for them. No one cared about their disappearances, not until the smell from Honka's attic filled the whole building. In 2019, filmmaker Fatih Akin adapted the story into a film, Der Goldene Handschuh, The Golden Glove, based on Heinz Strunk's novel. The movie shocked audiences with its raw, brutal realism, showing the filth, isolation, and violence of that era. Today, the Golden Glove still exists, a bar and cult landmark in Hamburg. Some say you can still feel the ghosts of the past there. And on the wall hangs a photo of Fritz Honka, a grim reminder of how easily monsters can hide in plain sight. Joachim Kroll. In July 1976, in the West German city of Duisburg, the police received a call from a distressed resident. The man claimed that his toilet was clogged and that he had found something in the pipes that looked like pieces of meat. When the officers arrived, they discovered something that would forever mark the history of German criminology. It wasn't animal meat. It was human body parts. That was when the world first learned about Joachim Kroll, a modest, unassuming man who for over 20 years led a double life. On one hand, he was a quiet, slow-moving industrial worker. On the other, a ruthless murderer and cannibal. Chapter 1. Childhood. Joachim Georg Kroll was born on April 17, 1933, in Hindenburg today, Zabrze, in Upper Silesia. He was the youngest of 8 children in a poor working-class family. His father fought on the front during World War II, and after the war the family was expelled to Germany. Even as a child, Joachim stood out among his peers. He was slow, shy, and intellectually delayed. He struggled academically and was often mocked. Psychologists later estimated his IQ at around 76, below average. Animals fascinated him, but in a disturbing way. Instead of playing with them, he would harm them, causing pain and observing their reactions. This was the beginning of the sadistic tendencies that would later spiral out of control. Chapter 2. First Crimes. After the war, Kroll settled in North Rhine-Westphalia. He worked as a machine operator, rented modest rooms, and avoided social contact. Outwardly, he appeared to be a typical, harmless, working-class German. But in 1955, at the age of 22, his dark side first emerged. His first known victim was 19-year-old Irmgard Strehl. Kroll lured her into the woods, raped her, and then strangled her. He dismembered the body, taking parts home with him. For years, the police could not connect this murder to any suspect. This was only the beginning. Chapter 3. Years of Terror. The Monster of the Ruhr. In the following years, Joachim Kroll continued to kill. His victims varied in age: women, teenagers, and even children. He chose random people often encountered in parks, forests, or near rivers. Each murder followed a similar pattern: rape, strangulation, and dismemberment. From some victims he would cut out pieces of flesh, take them home, cook them, and eat them usually with potatoes or sauce. His crimes spanned the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The police were helpless. Rumors of the monster of the Ruhr, der Ruhrmörder, circulated in Germany, but no one suspected that the killer was the quiet, unassuming man next door. Chapter 4. Last Victim. In 1976, Kroll committed his final crime. 4-year-old Marion Ketter went missing while playing outside her home. A search was launched immediately. A few hours later, the police received a report of a clogged sewer and of strange meat leftovers in the pipes. Following the trail, investigators traced the evidence back to Joachim Kroll's apartment. In the refrigerator, they found parts of the girl's body, and on the frying pan meat that he later admitted he had planned to eat. In a pot, pieces of arms and legs were cooking, and intestines were in the sink. Kroll was immediately arrested. Chapter 5. Interrogation and Trial. During questioning, he remained calm, almost naive. He could not understand why people were horrified. When asked why he did it, he replied without emotion. Meat was expensive. Human meat tasted good. He confessed to 14 murders, though the police suspected there may have been more, possibly up to 20. During the 1982 trial, his lawyers attempted to prove insanity, but the court deemed him fully responsible. Joachim Kroll was sentenced to life imprisonment. Chapter 6. Death and Legacy. Kroll died in 1991 in Duisburg prison from a heart attack. He never expressed remorse. His case continues to shock and fascinate psychologists and criminologists. He became an example of the so-called opportunistic serial killer, a person who did not kill out of hatred, but out of a cold, perverse need to satisfy his urges. Ahmad Suradji. Chapter 1. Silence over the plantations. Sumatra, a land heavy and humid, the air thick with the scent of sugarcane and wet earth. Among the fields where the wind stirs the stalks stands a small village, Pasar Ronkat. It was here in 1949 that a boy named Ahmad Suradji was born. At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about him. The son of a herdsman, quiet and observant, he liked to spend his time in the fields with the cattle. But in his world, spirits were as real as rain and sunlight. In Indonesia, and especially on Sumatra, dukun, traditional healers and shamans, held near-divine authority. People sought them out for everything, for health, for love, for good fortune. And it was there, in the shadow of rituals and superstition, that the story of one of Southeast Asia's most terrifying murderers began to take root. Chapter 2. The Dream of Power. Years passed. Ahmad grew up, married, tended his cattle, and led a quiet life. But with time, as he later claimed he felt a calling, he began to practice as a dukun, a healer. People brought him money gifts and gratitude. They believed he could heal and predict the future. One night around 1986, Ahmad had a dream. In that dream, as he later testified, the spirit of his father appeared to him. The spirit told him that if he wanted to attain full power, he must offer a sacrifice. Not one, not two, but 70 women. It was not their death that mattered, said the voice, but the ritual itself, drinking the saliva of the victims, would grant him mastery over life and death. A dream that for most would be a nightmare became for Ahmad a revelation, and from that night onward his life changed irreversibly. Chapter 3. The Ritual of Blood and Earth. The victims came of their own accord. From nearby villages and towns, young women, sometimes mere girls, came seeking help in matters of love, wealth, or luck. Ahmad greeted them with a smile. He offered them a ritual of purification. At night, he led them into the sugarcane field near his home. There he told them to dig a small pit step into it and stand waist-deep in the soil. He said it was part of the ceremony. When they were trapped in place, he prayed in whispers. Then a cord, a wire, sometimes a leather strap, a muffled cry, a final breath. Afterward, he leaned over the body and drank a few drops of saliva, believing that in doing so, he absorbed the essence of life itself. He buried the bodies always with their heads turned toward his house. He said that this way the energy of the victims would return to him, strengthening his spirit. It went on for years. No one suspected anything. The sugarcane fields were thick and silent, and the victims were often lonely without families. In this way, over more than a decade, Ahmad Suradji murdered 42 women. Chapter 4. Shadows Among the Cane. Sumatra's nights are long. When fog settles over the fields, one hears only cicadas and the sigh of wind. In that silence, Ahmad buried his victims sometimes with the help of one of his wives. For yes, he was married not once, but 3 times. 3 sisters, all bound to him, all aware of his reputation as a powerful dukun. Some sources say that one of them, Tumini, helped him hide the bodies. Others claim she was terrified of him. But eventually, fate turned. In April 1997, a young woman named Shri Kamala Dewi disappeared. She was last seen riding a motorcycle to Suradji's house seeking advice. A few days later, her body was found shallowly buried in a sugarcane field. Chapter 5. The Fall of the Sorcerer. When the police entered the property, they had no idea what they would uncover. The ground nearby was soft, freshly disturbed. Excavations began. 1 body, then another, a 5th, a 10th. In total, 42. When Ahmad was arrested, he tried to deny everything. But under the weight of evidence, in his own words, he confessed. He claimed he was not a murderer, but merely an instrument of divine will. That he bore no hatred toward his victims, he was simply obeying the spirits. During the trial, he spoke calmly, without emotion. The judges looked at him in disbelief. In March 1998, Ahmad Suradji was sentenced to death by firing squad. Chapter 6. Death and Legend. 10 years later, in July 2008, the sentence was carried out. He was executed in Delhi Serdang, not far from where his victims had died. Until the end, he remained calm. He said he would soon see his father again. For many, he was a monster. For others, a warning. But there were still whispers that he truly possessed power, that his spirit still roams the sugarcane fields, where the earth refuses to bear crops again. Chapter 7. The Shadow That Remained. Today, the plantation where the victims were buried looks ordinary, but the locals never pass through it after dark. They say that at night one can hear the whispers of women calling for help, and a single deep voice murmuring a prayer under its breath. Tamara Samsonova. Chapter 1. The Grandma No One Feared. At first glance, she looked like any other elderly woman. Gray hair, a calm smile, a slightly hunched posture. In the apartment block on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, everyone knew her. Tamara Mitrofanovna Samsonova, the neighbors would say, with a smile and respect. A quiet, lonely pensioner. No one suspected that behind the door of her flat hid something that resembled the script of a dark thriller more than the daily life of an old lady. Because Tamara was not an ordinary grandmother. The press later called her the Granny with a Bandit's Soul. Others simply Granny Ripper. Chapter 2. Beginnings. Tamara Samsonova was born on April the 25th, 1947, in the small town of Ujgur in Siberia's Krasnoyarsk region. She grew up in difficult post-war times. She was intelligent, ambitious, graduated from school with honors, and dreamed of the big world. In the 1960s, she moved to Moscow to study foreign languages. Later, like many young people, she ended up in Leningrad, today's St. Petersburg. There, she met her husband, Alexei Samsonov. For years, they seemed to have a happy marriage. She worked at the tourist agency Intourist, serving foreign guests at the Grand Hotel Europe. Life went on as usual. From the outside, almost exemplary. Chapter 3. The Disappearance of Alexei. In the year 2000, Alexei suddenly disappeared, without a trace. Tamara reported him missing, but investigators found no leads. Her husband vanished like a stone into water. Friends comforted Tamara. Neighbors sympathized. Poor woman left alone after so many years. But later, when the story came to light, police began to suspect that Alexei might not have gone far, that maybe he had gone to the kitchen and never came out again. Chapter 4. The Diary and the First Clues. After her husband's disappearance, Tamara began renting out a room in her apartment. Many people passed through it: students, workers, retirees. Some stayed briefly, others disappeared without saying goodbye. In 2015, one of her tenants, 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova, stopped answering her phone. Neighbors noticed a strange smell in the building. When they opened the dumpster behind the building, they found bags. Inside, human remains. The police quickly traced the trail to Samsonova's apartment. In the kitchen, traces of blood, a saw, knives, and in her room, a thick notebook filled with small handwriting. A diary. It contained entries in Russian, English, and German. One of them read, "I killed my tenant Volodya. I cut him up in the bathroom, packed the body parts, and threw them away in different parts of the district." Chapter 5. The Murderous Granny. Investigators were shocked, not only by her actions but by the way Tamara wrote about them, calmly, without emotion, as if noting down a shopping list. Her diary contained various names, dates, and descriptions suggesting there may have been more victims. Not 2, not 3, maybe even 14. Some fragments hinted at possible cannibalism, though this was never officially confirmed. Investigators found books on the occult in her apartment, snippets of magical texts, photos, and strange notes. It seemed Tamara believed that by killing, she could prolong her own life. Chapter 6. The Smile in Custody. When the police arrested her, Tamara did not resist. She didn't cry. She didn't deny anything. She smiled. In recordings from custody, she spoke calmly. "I had been preparing for this for decades. It was done deliberately. With this last murder, I closed the chapter. Investigators said she looked like someone who felt relief, not remorse, as if someone had finally allowed her to rest from the secret she had carried for years." Chapter 7. The Trial and the Diagnosis. After Tamara's arrest, the court ordered psychiatric evaluations. Experts determined that she suffered from schizophrenia and was dangerous to others. She did not stand trial as a regular criminal. She was sent to a high-security psychiatric institution in Kazan, where she remains to this day. She expresses no remorse. She does not ask for release. Once she told one of the doctors, "I've done everything already. Now I'm just waiting." Chapter 8. How many did she really kill? This question remains unanswered to this day. She was proven guilty of 2 murders, that of Valentina Ulanova, and one tenant known as Volodya. However, investigators suspected there could have been up to 14 victims. Tamara's diary mentioned names of people whose families had reported them missing near her home. But there was never enough evidence to confirm all the cases. The bodies were dismembered, thrown into dumpsters often beyond identification. For the prosecution, too little to convict. For the public, more than enough to be afraid. Pedro Alonso López. Chapter 1. A Child of the Streets. Pedro was born in 1948 in the small Colombian town of Santa Isabel. He was the 7th of 13 children of a poor woman struggling to survive on her own. His father had been killed before he was even born, during the country's civil war. Pedro's childhood was filled with poverty, fear, and violence. Home offered no warmth, and the streets became his only shelter. When he was just 8 years old, his mother threw him out of the house. From that day, he lived on the streets of Bogotá, sleeping under bridges, begging and fighting for each meal. It was there, among the dangers of street life, that something dark began to grow inside him, a shadow no one would ever truly understand. Chapter 2. Escape and the First Crimes. At the age of 12, Pedro was sent to an orphanage run by monks. He tried to escape several times until one day he vanished completely. He wandered across Colombia, Venezuela, and Peru. In 1969, he was caught in a small Peruvian village after attempting to take a child away. The local people wanted to punish him themselves, but a missionary intervened and pleaded for mercy, believing the young man could change. Pedro accepted the chance, but deep inside, he had already chosen his path. Chapter 3. The Shadow over the Andes, the 1970s. Pedro moved through the Andes across Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador. He changed names, appearances, and homes, always staying one step ahead. His victims were always the same type, poor, defenseless children from the streets or small markets. He would earn their trust with kindness, then lead them away, and they would simply vanish. Over the years, hundreds of young girls disappeared across the region. Police saw no pattern. They believed it was the result of poverty, trafficking, or war. No one imagined that a single man could be behind it all. Pedro believed he was untouchable. Chapter 4. The Capture of the Monster. In the Ecuadorian city of Ambato, after heavy rains, locals discovered mass graves in the hills. At the same time, vendors at a nearby market noticed a man trying to lure a young girl with sweets. They recognized him from police sketches and captured him. An angry crowd surrounded him, but police arrived just in time. The man they arrested was Pedro Alonso López. During questioning, he spoke calmly, not with regret, but with a disturbing pride. He claimed to have killed more than 300 children across 3 countries. He even led investigators to the places where he had buried them. The world was horrified. It was one of the largest cases of serial killings ever uncovered. Chapter 5. The Trial and Sentence. In 1981, his trial began. The evidence, his own words, and the family's testimonies left no doubt. But at that time, Ecuador's law allowed a maximum sentence of 16 years in prison, no death penalty, no life sentence. In prison, Pedro behaved like a model inmate. He read the Bible, worked in the kitchen, and told others that he had found God. Yet many who met him said there was still something cold in his eyes, a quiet pride, as if he still believed he was the master of his work. After 14 years in 1994, he was released early for good behavior. He was handed over to Colombia, where he was declared insane and placed in a psychiatric hospital. 4 years later, doctors said he was cured. He was released with new documents and disappeared. Chapter 6. Disappearance. After 1998, his trail vanished completely. He was last seen near the Colombian town of Tunja. A few months later, young girls began disappearing again. There was no evidence, only fear and suspicion. In 2002, Interpol issued an international warrant for his arrest. He has never been found. No body, no grave, no proof of death. Some believe he was killed by the relatives of one of his victims. Others think he escaped once more, perhaps living under a new identity. To this day, no one knows the truth. Only the legend remains of the man who called himself the Master of Death. The world remembers him as the Monster of the Andes,